I'm Mike,
And I'm Amber. Welcome to the Covenant Chronicles,
where we tell you the truth about relationships.
giving you the tools to build the foundation you always needed. Hi, welcome back to the podcast.
That's crazy. All right,
We're back.
we are back. We're laughing right now because every podcast it seems that there's no like warning, hey, we're going to start, or like a countdown or anything. It's just I'm sitting here staring off into space or twiddling my thumbs or messing with my phone or whatever I'm doing. And all of a sudden, Amber starts talking, and here we are.
I like messing with you.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Man, so apparently I was told that I have to talk about myself tonight.
Well, I did one introducing myself and kind of telling my story. So now it's your turn so people can get to know you a little better.
Hmm.
I'm here. You weren't here for mine, but
Hmm.
I can make a little commentary if I feel like it.
Oh, gotcha. So I'm at a disadvantage here. I see how it is. Where to start, I guess is the question. Probably going back to childhood. You know, I was an only child. I would say, well, this is a tough one because for all intents and purposes, I, for the longest time, kind of had this mindset of like, man, I have this really normal childhood, nothing crazy, nothing out of the ordinary, had some cool stories. But the more I've learned and the more I've understood my parents, the more I've understood myself, the more I realized that there was a lot more to my childhood than I cared to realize, I guess.
You're a
And
guy. I think you just ignore things better.
way to call me out. um, but yeah, I mean that's I guess a big thing for me is that there has been some stuff I had to work through that I didn't exactly realize. My parents are still together. It's been, oh, I don't know, 37 years or something. I don't even know, 33 years. I don't know, some crazy number like that. Mid 30s. You know, I did have a pretty good childhood. You know, they did the best that they could. And I got a lot of really cool experiences that would say a lot of kids don't, you know. My dad owned his own business growing up, and that was really cool in a lot of ways. You know, it was a double-edged sword. My dad did travel a lot, so he was gone a lot. But the flip side is sometimes I did get to go with him. You know, we got to travel around the state together. I got to go a lot. You know, he would plan his business trips, if you will, align them up in such a way that the ones in the summer just so happened to be in the same town that, you know, our favorite fishing spot was in. So we got to spend a lot of time in the summertime fishing. In the wintertime, you know, got to go with him occasionally, but for the most part, you know, he was gone a lot, doing stuff throughout the state or, you know, down in the lower 48. And I guess I never really thought about it and how that played into certain things. You know, we joke a lot about, you know, I would act up or whatever, get out of line with my mom, and she'd call my dad. And then, you know, like a lot of people, you know, I grew up in that generation where whooping your butt was still a thing. And so I didn't just get the, okay, when dad came home from work at 5 o'clock. No, I got to sit there and think about my butt whooping for 2 or 3 days. Um, and you know, I laugh about it now, but it was one of those things where I don't know why. I have some specific memories where I definitely gave my mom a harder time than I should have. But you know, especially in junior high and high school. And you know, looking back at it now, I tended to fall into these crowds that weren't like the best crowd to fall into, I would say. You know, the troublemakers in the class and this and that, and I would end up hanging out with them a lot. And I don't know what it was because I didn't like a lot of the behavior. I didn't participate in a lot of it, but I would hang out with these kids. And As I got older, I just learned to be, I don't know what you'd call it, but kind of make friends with everybody, in junior high and high school. And I really seem to, I guess, make friends with, everybody. And, it's really interesting because if you knew me in high school, I was not the best when it came to women. And not that I couldn't get women, but I didn't know the word loyal. And
Yeah.
I like to play my options, which is really ironic because I don't even think I kissed my first girl until probably eighth grade, right? And I had, like little crushes in elementary school and middle school and whatever. And I don't think that, I don't know that there's necessarily perfect age to start, kissing girls, but
I was 16 when I had my
well,
first
you
kiss,
lived
so,
under a
you know.
rock, so there's that, you know. But that it was funny because for the longest time I was afraid to kiss girls, which is really ironic. And then once I did, then it was a whole different ballgame.
Uh,
But it was funny because I was, and it wasn't, I had I remember there was a girl that, we were, I guess what you'd call boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever the extent of that would look like in, I don't know, seventh grade probably.
Mhm.
And her friends used to razz me so much because I wouldn't kiss her. And it was like this whole thing. And then, yeah, I don't even remember how that came to an end, to be honest with you, but it, uh, it was an interesting experience, and then I fell into high school and I met my now ex-wife, freshman year. She's actually one of the first girls I talked to. Wasn't very far into school. I want to say it was, well, it would have had to been because, we start school at the end of August and I met her a few days before my birthday in October. So,
Yeah,
it,
shortly after.
yeah, yeah.
Wouldn't have been long.
So she wasn't the first girl I talked to. Now I think about it, she was the second. Or I talked to a few,
There
but
you go.
she was the one that I was second girl I started quote unquote dating. Yeah, I forgot about a couple of them.
Getting all the
And
scoop tonight.
you know, looking back on being able to look in the, hindsight 2020 or whatever you want to call it, probably shouldn't have dated her, and not because she was a bad person, but she, everybody has their own issues. I was a typical high school boy. I didn't know what a relationship was. I was just there to play around. And if she
Mhm.
wanted to call me her boyfriend or whatever, right, I was all about it. And unfortunately, that, set up the basis of these long-term games that we played in our early relationship for a lot of years. And it also led into our young adult lives. Shoot, we had our first kid together. We weren't even married. I want to say my daughter was a couple months old, would have been Easter, so 2 or 3 months old. And I proposed to her. We had been on and off all through high school, basically pretty much on after high school. I don't know why. Still hadn't decided to be serious at that point in time. And, she had her own stuff to work through, but we somehow decided to keep it going. And, we got engaged, drug out the wedding for years. Um, we planned it 2 or 3 times. And then, like, I'm talking, I lost money on photographers and DJs and all. And this is when it was cheap, right? Like a deposit for a
Yeah.
DJ was like $500, which I guess, is still some money, but compared to what it is now, or like a photographer, I think a deposit was like $250 or something. The whole thing to do your wedding was like 5, 6, $700 back then, right? I mean, it wasn't crazy, uh,
Not like it is now, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. I mean, and nothing against photographers, right? I mean, prices have gone up on everything. So I guess just having that retrospective, I've done it before where it was a tenth of what it costs now, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, me too.
So it was it was an experience, and I would say, my 20s was probably one of the most influential times. Ultimately, I had 4 kids with her, and we actually, I want to say, now with us not being together, we work a lot better together and ironically enough, communicate better now than I think we did most of our marriage, to be honest with you. And it's a testament, she's done amazing work on herself. I've done a lot of work, and um, we have kids, so we have to try and do our best to communicate and co-parent for the kids. But um, we my 20s was interesting because I still hadn't committed to her um, at that point in time, and even though we went through the motions, we went through all the stuff that we were supposed to do. I mean, the stuff that I try to leave a lot of her side out, because I also don't want to uh I guess give anybody any impressions of anything, right? Because this is about me. So on my side, I'll say I hadn't committed to her, and I kept playing games, really. I mean, it'd be the best way to describe it. And I wasn't being the man that I should have been. I had multiple kids at this point. And my last kid was the youngest one. He was born in 2018. So, I had my first kid at 18. I guess something to do with 18 numbers here. But, Adelaide, she was 18, or when I was 18. And then progressively having kids in my early 20s and mid 20s, it was interesting because I hadn't figured out who I was at that point in time. And I was trying to live almost a double life of, there was the by day, I'm trying to be who I think I should be because society says I should be. And then by night, I'm, doing whatever or living the both lives. And it really was detrimental to, in a lot of ways, my kid's childhood and my relationship at that point. And I started getting it together. There was a point in which I don't know why. I can't say for sure what the switch was at that, or what the catalyst was at that point. And I think it was just trying to be better for the kids, where I started choosing to not play the games I had, not, do things that I had. And for what it's worth, there were still things that influenced the relationship at that point. I wasn't, I'd given up a lot of stuff, but there were still things that at the time I didn't realize were a problem, right? So that was, I guess, a major issue. But like porn, the way I talk to my friends, that sort of thing, I didn't recognize those as being detrimental at the time, or the impact they can have. And so I did start though, focusing on trying to be better in a lot of ways. And about that time, I started a business, um, and I was working on some stuff there with the business, and it grew. And it was just a small thing I started. Was working, let's see, I was working at the dealership. I quit, went to work for a bank, went to do night stocking at store. And on top of that, I went and started this business. Um, it was just, it wasn't anything crazy. It was, selling stuff and doing work out of my garage at the time, and it rapidly grew. And so in the early days, I added somebody and I made them a partner in the business. And this is like, I don't know, probably 6 months into the business, you know? But he did a lot of the back end stuff. I was still the face of everything. Um, and so we slowly started working. And at this time, we're having more kids and the last kid. And I was doing everything I could at this point to support my family, or so I thought, because I didn't understand the sides of emotional support and being present and how all of that plays into things, right? And I was very much in the mindset I think a lot of guys fall into of, well, I'm just working and I'm paying the bills, right? I'm working three jobs or two jobs in a business and I'm paying the bills and this, that, and the other. And that's me supporting my family or taking care of my family. And that should be good enough. So at the time, I fell, me and my at the time wife fell into a lot of the traps that you see couples get into, where the guy falls into that mindset. She feels very alone and just this perpetual cycle. And as things progressed, things grew, the business took off, added a third business partner, about 2 years in. Business lasted about 3.5, 4 years. So I'd say about the midway point, there was another business partner. And, I at the time didn't understand what I was in for. I didn't understand everything that was going on. And also struggled a lot with the relationship. And, I thought a lot of it was just normal and, oh, we had kids and this and that. Now I can go back and see it for the fact that it wasn't normal and we had a lot of crap to work through on both of our sides of the fence. And it became this thing. So, we get a couple years into it, bunch of stuff happens, and uh, we have to close the doors on the business. And there was some stuff going on. We were fighting the government at the time. Attorneys basically telling us to shut up, not say anything, don't tell anybody anything because they could come back and bite us. And unfortunately, you know, there was a lot of other stuff. We tried to get rid of one of the business partners about a month before we closed the doors just because of a lot of stuff that had gone on. And unfortunately, we weren't able to salvage it. There was a lot of stuff on the backside that most people never knew. And unless you were, one of our partners or one of the business partners or one of our intimate partners, there's stuff to this day that most people don't know. And it created this situation where we closed the doors and now I'm in this fight with the government and massive strain on my family. I basically cashed out any sort of savings or investments or whatever and tried to use it to help people. And we ended up like having nothing other than what was physically in our house. And we had to, I sold off a bunch of stuff at the same time. And so it was this thing. And because we couldn't say anything, there was a lot of people affected by this. I was the face of the company. So I took the brunt force of it. Everybody pointed fingers. And so I'm dealing with that. And, we had been before this happened, we've been planning, I had stepped back a lot in that primary business. I had two other businesses at the time. I lost those. And we had been planning a move though to the East Coast. And we found ourselves in this place where we had, well before any of this went down, we had started looking at selling the house. We were, planning to move. And here I was, needed to generate income for my family to take care of my family. I had nothing. There was a lot of stuff I found out. In fact, I was way further in the hole than I thought because of some stuff that had gone on that I had no idea about. Um, And it created this place where I didn't know what to do. And so now there's even further strain on, uh, the relationship. And we ended up just completing the house sale, moving to the, East Coast like we originally intended, and spent time over there. And when I did that, this was like this catalyst, right? Of essentially, what am I doing with my life, right? Um, I had put on a bunch of weight. I wasn't happy. Uh, I lost everything. You know, everybody blamed me, regardless of what actually happened. And we get into this place of, okay, what am I going to do now? I had to make some pretty drastic decisions, and I did. But part of those was getting back to focusing on figuring out how to be a good partner, how to be a good father, how to just show up on a daily basis. This is where I went to school, right? I started consuming knowledge in business and in relationships at ridiculous levels, right? Like college graduate levels, right? I mean, I'm spending hours a day. If I wasn't sleeping, and even then, half the time, I'd have a podcast or something going in my ear. But if I wasn't sleeping or spending active time with my family, I mean, even the jobs I was at, I found, always found these jobs to where I could mostly work while having a dang AirPod in my ear. And I was just consuming knowledge. I would probably have a solid 8 hours of podcast between business and relationships a day. I was reading books, just blowing through books, consuming knowledge. I joined I don't even know what you call it, um, an academy, if you will, that was all about getting your life together. I started getting in shape, getting healthy, focusing on building my life, figuring all this stuff out. And this is about the time I really started falling into some rooms with people that I don't even know how I ended up there, but I was able to have conversations with people, very wealthy and very paid business people that were very successful in all aspects of their life. And I was able to pick their brains and understand stuff and do these, gain knowledge in ways that people spend exorbitant amount of money to try and do. To this day, I don't know how or why. It just happened, and seemed to keep happening. And so we get back to some point we made a decision to move back, you know, back here, and that was an experience. I I had started working on myself here, but one thing I can acknowledge now is that my marriage was already gone, and I didn't realize it and so as we're moving back, I find out that, she was having an affair. Um, I find out all this other stuff. I start, um, kind of being in a weird place mentally. But, and, the whole trip back was like issue after issue. The first day in, we get stuck 2.5 weeks. The next, we get one more day of traveling, and then we're stuck for 3 days. And we get, I think it was another day or day and a half or 2 days, and then we get stuck for 2 months, right? Like it was this insane journey to get back here. And I get back, and we start splitting up, and it was a slow kind of drug out process. And it's interesting because a lot of people would look at that and have negative things to say on either side, whether it was, okay, well, I deserved it, or whether it was, she's a bad person. And the truth, neither of those things are true. At the end of the day, relationships are very predictable, and when both partners are not showing up the way they're supposed to show up for an extended period of time, I mean, years and years and years, it doesn't matter if you magically flip a switch. Like, it, it, there's a point in which everybody is gone, and whether that is physically, mentally, emotionally, like they hit a point when they're emotionally and mentally gone, and when they've hit that point, there's not a lot that can bring partners back together, with the exception of both of them fully committing to fixing it. And it, at that point, they both have to be all in. And if either of them are, half in, half out, I mean, it just doesn't work, right? Unless there are, don't get me wrong, there are situations in which the guy has brought her back, but he also completely stopped worrying about her and focused on himself, right?
Mhm.
And that was one mistake I made, is I continued this long drawn out process, which I think hurt things more than it helped things. Um, I thought I was doing it for the right reasons. I thought that, trying to keep the peace for the kids, and, make sure she's squared away and all this stuff. And then I realized now that it was, all just selfish in a lot of ways. And at the same time, I'm dealing with this. I find this out. We get back to state. We're splitting up. I had somebody from the basically back in the business days try to extort me. And all this stuff is just occurring. And I went even deeper now, right, on relationships. And at this point, I had taken a lot of the knowledge that I had learned in the business sense, both past failures and then the new knowledge that I'd learned. And I built these systems and procedures and processes and ways of doing things. And I just used them to help people, because I never wanted to see anybody fail or go through the crap that I went through. And I also started doing the same thing with relationships. I wanted to help people never have to go through the crap that I went through. And so I continued on, I started making an attempt to get back to my faith. And there's a specific person that showed up in my life. And I can say now that God put him in my life for a reason. And it was somebody, it was the most random person. Like, I'd spent time around him, we'd spent time around each other a little bit here and there, but it wasn't like, I was super close to this guy for a long time or anything. And he showed up in my life at this time, and he was this driving factor of, like, almost like a guardian angel, if you will. And every time I would get upset or be frustrated about something in this process, right, of like the separation, he was he would show up and he would say, "Hey, go read this verse. What is what does the Lord say? What does the word say?" Right? And he continued to push me in that manner for a long time. And as I healed through this and worked through it, and I did dumb stuff. I mean, when her and I were separated, I went out and, went back to the playing games, right? Dating for a couple months just to have fun, and whatever. And I was honest and upfront about it. I'd tell them mostly, but, most all of them before, "Hey, you're only going to be around for a couple months. I'm not looking." And
So rude.
it was honest, you know what I mean? And, like, I'm not saying it was right, but at the same time, you know what I mean? How many people nowadays, like, get into a relationship and they feel played or they feel manipulated, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah,
the people aren't honest. And that was just my thing, is like, I'm not here to find a soulmate. I'm here to have fun. You know,
yeah,
it's gonna last a couple months, and then I'm gonna be done. I'm just warning you up front. Like, and it sounds crazy, but at the end of the day, like, I feel that that is a better way to deal with things than to bullshit, right? So many guys nowadays are like, "Well, for me to get what I want, I gotta lie, and I gotta say these things, and I gotta da 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 da." And it's like, for what? right? Like for
Yeah.
what? Because at the end of the day, right? Like if you're just trying to go out and get laid, let's be honest, right? It's all over Tinder.
Yeah.
Right, if you really just wanna do that, go jump on Tinder, download the app, and freaking, you know, go have your fun, and what's dumb is guys still be like, "Oh, well, I gotta be this thing and pretend that it's something it's not." The girls on Tinder are looking for one thing too, so stop bullshitting and just tell them what it is, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, you know, so I worked through that though, and I used it. What's interesting about it though is I learned a ton from that, and I learned so much about different interacting with different women and personalities, and women at different love languages, and just all this different stuff. And I had, at this point, darn near had a freaking college degree in relationships right at this point. And it was this weird thing where at this point I was like, okay, I need to get serious about, who I am, and what my future looks like. And ironically enough, when I did that, then I met you. And I would be lying if I said how I wasn't, if I was looking to be serious. Also, what's super interesting is when I hit you up, you were so far left field from all the women I had talked to that I was actually intrigued, and I just hit you up because or initiated contact because I was like, well, this is so far left field of everything that I've been talking to, and I don't know if it was like my brain just said, hey, try something different, or if it was just me wanting to try something different, or what it was, right? But I wasn't even like
God.
100%, right? And we've talked about that, and the way that it went down, and the way I had already gotten rid of, any sort of way to communicate or date or whatever. I got rid of everything, and then just the way I got drawn back into that specific thing, and then contacting you, it had to, there's no way it was anything other than him having a plan. And the interesting thing about it though is, obviously making a stupid joke right out of the gate to you, worked very well. But we also didn't have any boring conversations, and that's
Yeah.
that's what's unique. And we talk about this all the time. Is like we first started talking, there wasn't like, what's your favorite color? What do you like to eat? Well, how tall are you? What size
Yeah.
shoe do you wear? Like, there was nothing like that. I mean, we were flirty, and I think at one point I asked about your butt because, I'm a butt guy, is what it is. But, you know,
It's a good thing I have one.
yeah, but, we hit it off very well. And, even when we got into our initial relationship, we were still working through some of our own stuff, but it was really interesting in the way that like every interaction we had, or every, you know, issue we had to overcome, or any of this, it was like playing a sport, right? It was like for the first time we had done this for so long, right? And I was in my previous relationship, it was I think altogether 15 years, when you were in yours even longer, and we did it wrong for so long,
Mhm.
right? That it was this situation of, well, okay, now let's try all this stuff that we learned. And then we did it, and we
Mhm.
did it over and over, and we got better at it, and we continued to get better at it. And then it was like practicing a sport, right? To where like the more time, hockey, right? Your boys play hockey. I used to play hockey. It's this thing that like you continue to get better the more time you are on the ice,
Mhm.
the more ice time you put in, and the more you practice these basic fundamentals, the better you get. And that's exactly how our relationship worked. And all of this stuff that I went through, from just, even back to my childhood and having to work through some of these things, I guess we never even circled back around to that, but just where I realized that, well, it wasn't all peaches and rainbows. And, even though my parents are together nowadays and they did, everything they could, there was issues back then that had a long lasting imprint. My parents didn't know how to communicate. They still don't know how to communicate. They've been together 30 some years and they don't know how to communicate,
Mhm.
right? So my example of how to communicate in a relationship was non-existent.
Mhm.
Um, and then all these other things, right, that come up in life to where the marriage and everything else that I'd been through, and learning from all of those scenarios, and it just added to the toolbox of things to be able to employ or deploy inside of a relationship. you know the more I look back on it, the more I'm like, okay, I had to go through all of that
Mm.
because I had to learn,
Yeah.
you know and then being able to take that now and just help people and impact lives, right? Like, I don't talk about that crap. I don't, other than you, because like, I guess I don't have to, but I choose to be like, hey babe, by the way, I'm not going to be home at whatever time because I'm doing whatever, right?
Yeah.
When I go sit down and I take somebody out to dinner because they're struggling in their relationship, or they had some crap, or they're going through a divorce, or maybe they're getting married, right?
Mhm.
And I just take them out to dinner and I try my best to give them the best information I can from a man's perspective, and saying, look, this is how you need to deal with this situation. These are ways you can communicate. This is things that you're going to run into. Here's how to navigate those, and give those guys advice and help them. And at this point, I truly think that that's what all of it was for, is to be able to actually say, now I've been through some crap, and it's like when we talked about the other night, when we were, uh where were we? It must have been at Jamin's house, when we were talking about uh gold and silver and how they get the impurities out, and you put it
Yeah.
in the hottest part of the furnace,
Yeah.
and you basically let it heat up and essentially burn until it's so smooth that you can see your reflection in it,
Yeah.
right? And that's at the end of the day what all of this is for, is having to go through this and having to deal with the things so that now I can communicate with my kid's mom, and her and I are in a decent place to communicate. You and I can have the relationship we have that continues to grow and evolve, and we communicate and do things in a way that, like, people that have been at it a lot longer than us don't have the communication skills and the ability to communicate and work through things the way that we do,
Mhm.
right? um the way we communicate with the kids, the way we communicate with others, all of that came from the things that we've been through,
Mhm.
right? And maybe that's impactful. Maybe it will help reach somebody that says, hey, I've been through something similar, or I've been through a time in my life where you know I did my best to help people and it all came crumbling down, or I did, whatever the case may be. And people can connect to that and say, okay, there is light, and you have to go through these things so that you can grow from it and continue to be the version of yourself that you're actually meant to be.
Yeah. I think that's what we hope like, giving you a little backstory from both of us will, inspire you that, like, we are just normal people, but we've been through stuff and kind of worked our way to where we are now, and we're still not perfect, but we've worked through so much stuff and are trying every day to, be the best versions of ourselves, and just really want to help others with their relationships and help them get to the place that we're at, which, like I said, like, we're not perfect, and we have moments and days and everything just like everyone else, but we really have gotten to a place where we can communicate with each other, and, like, sometimes it's hard, but you know,
Hmm.
we make it a priority to communicate our best and share the things that we're feeling so that they don't stay bottled up and become giant issues.
Hmm.
So,
On that note, that's all I got. I could get into a lot more detail, but I don't think anybody wants to hear me ramble on for 4 or 5 hours. So,
yeah, just condensed. We're
all right. On
all
that
right,
note,
guys.
y'all, we'll talk to you next time.
Bye.